Capitol Records Studio A, Los Angeles, late 1958, 2:00 a.m. Nat King Cole sat alone at the piano, the only light in the vast studio coming from a single overhead lamp. The session musicians had left hours ago. The engineers were packing up, but Nat wasn't ready to leave. He played a blues progression, letting his fingers find the notes his voice had been singing all his life, but Capitol had never let him record. Raw, authentic, black. This was the music that had made him fall in love with performing in the first place, not the polished pop that had made him wealthy, not the orchestrated ballads that white audiences loved. This was the sound of South Side Chicago clubs where he'd started, the sound of his father's church, the sound of who he actually was underneath all the commercial success. "We should record this," he said to the engineer who was shutting down the board. "Record what? The session's over, Mr. Cole. We got what we needed. Not what Capitol needed, what I need." Before we dive into the story of how Nat King Cole secretly recorded his most authentic album, how Capitol Records locked it in a vault for being too black, and how it stayed hidden for 35 years until after his death, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this story about artistic authenticity versus commercial control is as relevant in 2026 as it was in 1958. Nat King Cole was trapped in golden handcuffs. By 1958, he was one of Capitol Records' biggest moneymakers. Mona Lisa had sold millions. Unforgettable was a standard. Too Young had topped charts. Every album he released went gold. Capitol loved him. White America loved him. He was making everyone rich, but he was creatively dying. Every album followed the same formula: orchestrated pop ballads carefully arranged to appeal to the broadest possible white audience. String sections, lush productions, songs about love and romance, and nothing that would make anyone uncomfortable. Beautiful music, safe music, white music. Nat had agreed to it because it worked, because it paid. Because fighting the system seemed pointless when the system was making him wealthy beyond his childhood dreams. But by his late 30s, success felt hollow. He'd proven he could sell records to white audiences. He'd proven he could cross over. He'd proven he belonged in mainstream American music. Now he wanted to prove he could make the music that actually mattered to him. The problem was Capitol Records. "Nat, you want to record what?" Alan Livingston, Capitol's president, stared at him across a mahogany desk in early 1958. "Blues, jazz standards, gospel-influenced pieces, music from my roots, music that's more." Nat paused, choosing his words carefully. "More authentic to who I am." Livingston's expression was pure corporate concern. "Nat, I understand the artistic impulse, but we have a formula that works. Your audience expects a certain sound. We can't alienate them. I'm not talking about abandoning the pop albums. I'm talking about one album, 12 songs. Let me make something real." Define real. Music that sounds like Black America, not like what white executives think Black America should sound like when selling to white audiences. Livingston's face tightened. There it was, the thing nobody wanted to say explicitly. "Be realistic. Our market research shows." "I don't care about market research. I care about making music that means something. Music that my father would recognize. Music that speaks to my community, not just to people who'll tolerate my voice if it's wrapped in enough strings." "Your community isn't buying enough records to justify the production costs." "Then I'll pay for it myself." That stopped Livingston. "You want to self-fund a Capitol Records album?" "I want creative control. You fund it, I get to make it my way, or I fund it myself and you distribute. Either way, I'm making this album." Livingston leaned back, calculating. "If we fund it and it doesn't sell, that's on us. If you fund it and it doesn't sell, you're out the money, but we're out the distribution investment. Neither option is good business." Then we're at an impasse. "Nat, why are you pushing this? You're at the top. Don't risk what we've built." "What you've built," Nat corrected quietly. "I've just been the voice. I want to build something myself." The meeting ended without resolution, but Nat had made his decision. Over the next 3 months, he quietly assembled musicians. Not the usual Capitol session players who read charts and played what they were told. Real jazz musicians, blues players. People who understood the music in their bones, not just technically. He called Charlie Harris, a bass player who'd worked the Chicago club circuit. Oscar Moore's younger brother Johnny, who played guitar like his instrument was an extension of his body. A drummer named Lee Young, who understood that blues rhythm was about feel, not precision. A pianist named Jer Wiggins, who could make gospel chords weep. These weren't men who played black music. These were black men who played their music. The difference mattered. He booked studio time late at night after his official Capitol sessions ended, usually starting around midnight, running until 4:00 or 5:00 a.m. The studio was empty at those hours, no executives, no A&R men checking whether the session was on brand, no corporate oversight. Just musicians and music. He paid for it himself. Studio rental, musicians' union rates, engineer overtime, tape costs, everything. By the time he was done, he'd spent over $30 of his own money, equivalent to over $300 today. A fortune, but creative freedom had a price, and Nat was willing to pay it. Between February and May 1958, across a dozen late-night sessions, Nat recorded 12 songs. Raw blues numbers where his voice had gravel and pain instead of polish. St. Louis blues played the way W.C. Handy had written it, mournful, aching, real. Trouble in Mind delivered like a man who'd actually known trouble. Jazz standards played the way they were meant to be played, loose, improvisational, alive. Sweet Lorraine transformed from the pop version he'd recorded for Capitol into something intimate and genuine. Gospel-influenced pieces where you could hear his father's church in every note, where the spiritual weight of Sunday mornings in Southside Chicago came through in ways his polished pop never allowed. The session musicians felt it. This was different. This was Nat King Cole unfiltered. One night, after a particularly intense take of I Want a Little Girl, where Nat's vocal was naked and vulnerable, the control room was silent for a full minute before anyone spoke. Jesus, Nat, Charlie Harris finally said, "Why don't you always sing like that? Capitol won't let me." "Why the hell not?" "Because white people prefer me polite." He called the album Riffraff. The title was deliberate provocation. Riffraff meant the undesirable element, the people polite society looked down on. Exactly how white America's mainstream had always seen authentic black culture, something to be refined, polished, made palatable, or hidden away. Nat was done hiding. The recordings were the best work he'd ever done. Every musician in those sessions knew it. The energy was electric. For the first time in years, Nat wasn't performing for an audience. He was performing for himself, for his community, for the music itself. When the sessions wrapped in late May, Nat had the tapes mixed and mastered. Then he scheduled a meeting with Capitol executives to play them the finished album. Alan Livingston brought 3 other executives to the playback session. Nat sat in the control room while the album played through Capitol's best speakers. He watched their faces, saw the moment they realized what they were hearing, saw the corporate calculation replacing whatever genuine musical appreciation they might have felt. When the last song ended, there was silence. "Well," Nat asked. Livingston spoke carefully. "It's ambitious, very different from your usual work. That's the point. Nat, this is too raw, too ethnic. Our audience won't understand it." "Your audience, white audiences, your audience too. They've made you a star, this music." Livingston gestured at the speakers. "This music is too black." There it was, said plainly. Too black for what? Nat's voice was dangerously quiet. "For commercial success, for crossover appeal, for the market we've built for you." "You mean too black for white people to feel comfortable." "I mean too risky. This isn't what people expect from Nat King Cole. It's not what they want. It's what I want. It's what I am." Another executive spoke up. "Nat, be practical. Your brand is sophistication, elegance, universal appeal. This album undermines that. It puts you in a box marked race music. You've spent your career climbing out of that box. I never wanted out of that box. You put me in a different box. One marked safe Negro who sings for white people. I'm trying to get back to what's real." Livingston's tone became firm. "We can't release this. It's not commercially viable. It'll confuse your audience and damage your brand. Then I'll release it independently. You signed a contract giving Capitol exclusive rights to your recordings. These were recorded in our studio with our equipment, even if you paid for the session time. Legally, they're ours." Nat felt the trap closing. "You're going to suppress this. We're going to protect our investment, which is you. Sometimes that means protecting you from yourself." The argument continued for an hour. Nat made his case. This was his best work, his most authentic work, the music he'd been born to make. Capitol made theirs. It was commercially unviable, would alienate his core audience, represented an unacceptable risk. In the end, Capitol had the power, the contract, the control, the tapes. "With us," Livingston said finally, "we'll archive them. Maybe in a few years, when the market's different, we can revisit. But for now, this album doesn't exist. You're locking it away. We're being responsible." Nat walked out of that meeting feeling something he hadn't felt in years, powerless. all his success, all his leverage, all his status as one of Capitol's biggest stars, and they could still tell him no. Could still suppress his most important work because it didn't fit their commercial calculation. The tapes went into Capitol's vault, stored, cataloged, forgotten. Nat tried to move on. He kept recording the pop albums Capitol wanted, kept touring, kept being the Nat King Cole that white America loved, sophisticated, elegant, safe. But something had broken. Maria noticed it first. "You're going through the motions," she said one night after a session. "I'm doing my job. You used to love your job. Now you're just performing it. What choice do I have? Capitol owns those recordings. They'll never release them. If I want to keep working, I have to play their game. For how long? Until I can't anymore." That moment came sooner than either of them expected. In 1964, Nat was diagnosed with lung cancer. The disease was aggressive, already advanced. He had maybe a year, maybe two, if treatment worked. Suddenly, legacy mattered more than commercial success. "I want those tapes released," he told Livingston from his hospital bed in early 1965. "Nat, we've discussed this. I'm dying. I don't care about market research or brand management or any of it. That album is my best work. I want people to hear it." Livingston's face showed genuine sadness. "I'm sorry about your diagnosis, truly, but the business reality hasn't changed. That music won't sell. Releasing it now while you're ill would look exploitative. Then release it after I'm gone. We'll consider it." They both knew what that meant. Nat King Cole died on February 15, 1965, at age 45. He never saw Riffraff released. Never knew if anyone beyond those session musicians and hostile executives would hear his most authentic work. The tapes stayed in the vault through the 1960s as America's music changed radically, through the 1970s as black music became commercially dominant, through the 1980s as jazz and blues underwent major revivals. The tapes sat forgotten while the world that might have appreciated them evolved around their absence, until 1991. Capitol Records archivist named Thomas Chen was conducting inventory in the company's vault, a climate-controlled room in the basement of Capitol's Los Angeles headquarters, lined floor to ceiling with master tapes dating back to the 1940s. Cataloging old masters, checking condition of historical recordings, doing the routine maintenance that kept archives organized. It was tedious work. Most of what he found was expected: commercial releases, alternate takes, session outtakes. The usual detritus of a major label's 60-year history. Then he found a box labeled N. Cole Riffraff 1958 Do Not Release. The do not release notation intrigued him. He'd worked in archives for 5 years and had never seen that specific phrasing. Usually unreleased material was marked outtakes or alternates or rejected. Do not release suggested something deliberate, something suppressed. He pulled the box, surprisingly heavy, 12 master reels, and brought them to a listening station. Threaded the first tape carefully. These masters were over 30 years old. If they degraded, they might be unplayable. He pressed play. What he heard stopped him cold. This was Nat King Cole, unmistakably that voice, that phrasing, that warmth, but different, raw, real, alive in ways Chen had never heard in Cole's released work. And Chen knew Cole's catalog intimately. He'd archived dozens of Cole albums. This was something else entirely. He listened to 3 songs, then called his supervisor. "You need to hear this, right now." His supervisor, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd been with Capitol since the 1970s, came down to the vault. Chen played her St. Louis Blues. Patricia's eyes widened. "That's Nat. Listen to the whole thing." By the end of the first reel, Patricia was on the phone with Capitol's current head of A&R. "We need to talk about something in the vault, something major." Within a week, the tapes had made their way to Capitol's current executives. The question was obvious: why had this never been released? Chen found the original notes, saw Livingston's memo from 1958, too ethnic for current market. "Archive indefinitely." One young A&R executive looked at that memo and laughed bitterly. They buried his best work because it was too black. In 1958, Jesus, what do we do with it now? Someone asked. "We release it." It's 1991. The market for authentic black music is the entire music industry. This is a historical document. It's also better than half the shit we're releasing now. The decision was made. Riffraff would finally be released 33 years after it was recorded, 26 years after Nat King Cole died. The album came out in late 1991 with liner notes explaining its history. Critics approached it with curiosity and left with awe. "This is Nat King Cole fully alive," wrote the New York Times. Every song breathes with authenticity his commercial work could only hint at. A tragedy that it took 33 years, Rolling Stone declared. Cole's most personal work suppressed because executives feared its blackness. The album sold respectably. More importantly, it reshaped Nat King Cole's legacy. Music historians began reassessing his career through the lens of artistic suppression. Natalie Cole heard Riffraff for the first time in 1991. She was 41, her father dead 20. 6 years, she'd never known this version of him, raw, unpolished, real. Listening to this, she said in interviews, I hear a part of him he couldn't show publicly. A part Capitol wouldn't let him show, like discovering a piece of my father I never knew existed. For musicians, Riffraff became cautionary tale and inspiration. Cautionary about corporate suppression. Inspirational because authentic work survives even buried for decades. Looking back, the two black reasoning seems absurd. The music capital feared in 1958, blues, jazz, gospel-influenced black American music became some of the most celebrated and commercially successful music of the late 20th century. But in 1958, Capitol's calculation was pure business. They had a star who could sell to white audiences. Why risk that by letting him make music that might limit his appeal? The answer, Riffraff, wouldn't have limited Nat's appeal. It would have expanded it, would have shown the full range of his artistry, would have let him be complete instead of confined. But that chance was taken from him, by executives who valued market share over artistry, by a system that saw black authenticity as liability instead of asset. Nat King Cole made Riffraff in secret studio sessions, pouring his soul into music Capitol Records deemed too black for white audiences and locked away for 33 years. By the time the world finally heard it, the man who created it had been dead for 26 years. That's the real story, not just suppression but waste, the waste of an artist's creative prime, the waste of music that could have mattered in its moment, the waste of authenticity sacrificed to commercial safety. Tapes survived, the music endures. Riffraff stands as both triumph and tragedy, a masterpiece finally heard decades too late.